What's going on, y'all? You already know what time it is. Welcome to the next episode of a Pondering Poet series. For this episode today, this episode is going to be about poets, rappers, lyricists. Why the division? Poets, rappers, and lyricists. Why the division? Um, Let me first start off by giving y'all kind of a basic definition that was given to me many years ago from a man. I can say his last name. Y'all really won't know who he is, but a man by the name of Mr. Anderson. So, Mr. Anderson, he was a former music theory teacher of mine when I first started going through undergrad long time ago. When it came down to my first iteration of going through undergrad, because just to let you know, I ended up starting undergrad right after high school. A couple of years, I ended up dropping out of school. Um, yeah, it's neither here nor there. Now, to put it out there, I'm about to get conferred for my master's degree fairly soon in education specifically, but I have my bachelor's in something totally different. Nevertheless, so one of the things that he told me, one of the things that he taught me was, a general basic definition of what music is. And he says that music is something pleasant to the ear. Music is something pleasant to the ear. Now, that could, be universal, in thinking about it, because everybody, has their, own perception of what music is and, have their own definition of what is pleasant to them when it comes down to any specific music genre. But also, it really doesn't get into, how subjective we can be in reference to how we see several genres of music, how we see music, how, we see, the content and context within music overall. But one of the things I wanted to, kind of bring up is when it comes down to the scope of how words are used in music, how they're used, efficiently and effectively, and then in addition to how, they're used in the worst way. Um, Now, disclaimer, I'm going to talk about my perception, of the state of hip hop right now, especially when it comes down to mainstream. Now, underground hip hop, or what would be considered to be if I could say independent artists, independent artists, when it comes down to hip hop, or independent rappers, or I also use the word interchangeably, rappers, lyricists. Um, I try not to, within certain contexts, but nevertheless, when it comes down to those independent lyricists, I listen to more independent artists now. There are only a few mainstream artists that I listen to, but one of the things I've realized, over a course of time, when it comes down to certain mainstream rappers that I've listened to, they're not, either they're not getting as much play now, because probably they haven't, come out with, something prominent for the public to be able to listen to, in reference to said, music company that they're signed with, so on and so forth, record company. But I've realized over the course of years, because I write and I'm a very huge logophile. If you don't know what logophile is lover of words. Um, uh, which is funny. I was actually introduced to that word many years ago when it came down to one of my former poetry students when I was in another country. She, gave herself the moniker logophile, and I was like logophile. And then I looked up the word. And I was like, oh, okay, lover of words. It's great. So I'm definitely a logophile, but I'm also, a stark wordsmith. I love words. I love using words. I love, putting them in context. I love bringing them together, so on and so forth. Um, Nevertheless, uh, when it comes down to, you know, certain, genres of music and the music industry now as we know it, what I do believe is within the United States, we kind of have a stake on how music is, kind of seen. Not necessarily, prominently seen around the world, but, we do have a stake in, how music is seen, and how it can be modified, changed over time, so on and so forth, based on several genres of music being created here. Not to, degrade or diminish any other genre of music, in either of the countries, but, we do have a lot of artists here in the United States that are prominently known around the world, and are delved into by, many people. Now, does it mean that the content that they're giving is something that is great for, people to listen to? That is completely subjective. But what I will say is, when it comes down to modern hip hop, I would even, I'll just say modern rapping or modern pop music. Because hip hop is a culture itself. Rapping is what you do within the culture of hip hop. But when it comes down to rapping now, there's not as much emphasis put on skill. There's not as much emphasis put on learning certain literary devices, within, bringing them to a certain context within the content that you're creating. A lot of things are, just whip it up in a blender, mix it up, to a certain level, a certain degree, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's, the specific product that you're giving. Which I believe, takes away from, the genre of hip hop, because now you have these new kids, who are listening to modern artists now that, real talk, just don't know that this was created, based on a stronger platform of bringing substance and context to the table when it comes down to what you're writing about, actually digging deep and using literary devices, being able to, understand, literary forms. Um, of course, in the hood, when it came down to, the hip hop culture being created and, the action of rapping, being created, being able to rap, um, the mindset back then, in the 70s and the 80s, it was just, being created, starting, 1973, DJ Cool Herc, Bronx, New York. Look up the history, behind it. Nevertheless, there is this mindset now that wasn't back then, where everybody was trying to, have a difference, be different, you know, being able to use, as much things to, be a great rapper, you know, bringing in new words, but obviously saying them in context and with, hip hop, being created and it being a socio-political movement. It talked about things in the hood, but it brought it into context of what was going on in the hood. Hood music, hood talk. You know what I'm saying? So, with that said, now we have more independent artists that are bringing more quality to, the hip hop genre than you have mainstream, because mainstream, have these corporate execs that are trying to essentially push a agenda that is bullshit. Now you see more and you hear more of drug user, music, from rappers, mainstream rappers now. But one time, back then, when it came down to gangster rap eventually changed into, drug dealing music. But, even back before that, the context of it was, this is what's happening in the hood because of, drugs being brought into our communities based on, the certain ones that were not of our communities bringing those drugs in. And when you have a lot of black men not being able to get a job, they got a family to take care of. Inevitably, they're going to, do everything in their power to be able to make some money to be able to take care of their family. But then they get wrapped up in that lifestyle. That was the context. But now you have kids that don't even understand that context anymore, where they just understand, about, the rapper themselves doing the drugs and, being able to go into, a psychedelic state that obviously it's not good, in context when it comes down to, understanding that all you're doing, is getting, drunk, getting, high. And in addition to that, spitting whack bars, spitting whack lines of poetry. It's really what it is. But let's get into, the differences, between, being a rapper, being a poet and, being a lyricist. The art of lyricism, and I'm gonna just go ahead and read this definition because I popped up with definitions and everything. But to be a lyricist is a person who writes the words to a popular song or musical. Um, Anyone who writes their own shit. When it comes down to their music, and able to put it to the music as far as instrumentals or as far as a beat, they're considered to be a lyricist. Like for me being a spoken word poet, I'm considered to be a lyricist because one, I know I can write lines of poetry when it comes down to saying them a cappella or without accompaniment. But I also know that I have the ability to be able to write, bars for, being able to spit the bars, behind a beat or behind, a musical instrument that is, playing in the background while I spit the bars. I know I can do that. I've done it before. Um, but in the scope of being a lyricist, one thing that comes with being a lyricist is knowing how to write, understanding the language that you are using, being able to say certain things in context, being able to be creative when it comes to saying certain things in context. That's a big thing. And, being a writer, being a true writer, you have to understand, how to use the language, how to use rules, in addition to knowing how to break them effectively, but still being creative in breaking them. Okay. Now get into, rap, being a rapper, so on and so forth. Obviously being a rapper is someone who, raps, and rapping is, and I'll just go ahead and read the definition, here. Um, so the aspect of rapping, you have, uh, in the informal, North American context, you have talk or chat in an easy and familiar manner. Talk or chat in an easy or familiar manner. Now, in this context, when it comes down to it being a noun, um, they give one, if I can say this, they give one uh, sentence example that states, we could be here all night rapping about the finer points of spiritualism. Where in looking at that, or looking at that sentence, someone who raps, raps to a beat will be able to take, the content of spiritualism and be able to expound upon it, within a rap song, being able to write bars about spiritualism as a whole, you know, and being able to be creative with it, but it's based on, what you end up using. Now, in rap, you have many devices that are interchangeable, to, being a poet and being a rapper, so on and so forth. More so when it comes down to me, I just understand, the various literary devices that can be used in poetry or used in rap. For me, there's no difference, but you have a lot of people who are separating the two because, for the longest, poetry has been seen as, high class, this is what you do when it comes down to being on a certain status, so on and so forth, and that's bullshit. That's complete bullshit, because everyone has the ability to be able to write poetry, because everyone has a lived human experience. You know, that's how I see it. Nevertheless, um, getting into, rapping, you have in rapping, and I'm a big, battle rap fan. I love battle rap, because I know what they're doing when it comes down to being able to create bars in context of a particular topic and being able to spit them effectively and easy for people to understand. That's great. When it comes down to rapping, you have, schemes, being able to talk about a specific topic within context of another topic. You have angles, being able to, get to a specific point based on the content that you're conveying, so you're able to, share something, within a certain context. Um, you have, punches, punchlines. Then you have setups, and then you have uh, 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 I'm trying to remember. You have setups, punches, and then you have haymakers. A haymaker is essentially, someone that has an extremely hard punch when it comes down to the punch line or the end of the bar that highlights something that you were trying to get to in context based on your setup. Um, where punches are essentially, the lines that hit, the lines that people, cheer for, the lines of poetry that people understand what you are talking about in context. Those are punches. The haymakers are, very great punches, you know. Nevertheless, there are many other devices that are used in rap, that are interchangeable to, poetry. And the only reason why I'm separating the two is because um rapping or hip hop has, skyrocketed as far as damn near being, top three, genres on the face of the earth that more so a lot of people listen to. Um, because of its popularity, in addition to the level of propaganda that is pushed when it comes down to certain mainstream artists that are pushing certain content that inevitably is not helping people, but helping, or getting people to, just become conditioned within whatever content that is being conveyed. For example, being a drug user. Now, for me, as far as, being a poet, spoken word artist, what may have you, I think spoken word artists, kind of balance themselves between, rapping and spitting poetry. They balance themselves between it. They're not, stuck in on one specific genre based on the perception of how the genre should be seen. They just have their own style. I believe I have my own style. I know how to rap. I know how to freestyle. I know how to convey poetry. I know how to, spit poetry. I know about, different forms of poetry. Excuse me, so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that I do know about. Um, but for me, I just use anything and everything to be able to convey a message to people within a certain context for them to understand something that they didn't know before, or for them to gain another perspective on something that they already knew. You know, that's what I like to do. I like to code my shit. I say code. I like to be very underhanded when it comes down to conveying something to someone, because I understand the value of, being cryptic, you know, conveying something that is within a certain context when a person gets it, but if they really broke it down, they would really understand, oh shit, it's not just only what he's saying, it's also what he's saying in the underlying meaning, you know? So for me, when I, think of rappers, what I'm saying, they are lyricists to me, in addition to the fact that they are poets to me. You know, I, sometimes like to say they're hood poets, what I'm saying? Where rapping, all it is, motherfuckers just, conveying, poetry from their perspective of, the daily shit that they go through, what their life experience is, you know, maybe, saying or calling yourself a poet is not, necessarily hard or, hood, you know what I'm saying? But it's all the same shit at the end of the day. It's just you got the rappers who end up learning it a certain way and they title it a certain way or coin it a certain way. And then you have your poets who do the exact same thing. Where I believe when it came down to how poetry was seen and then how rapping was seen, rapping obviously was seen at a degraded level based on the inception of it, and poets that were famous or prominent, ended up seeing it as a bastardized version of what poetry should be, which is bullshit. It's all the same shit. It's just about how you convey your poetry. And then also, when it comes down to most poets this day and age, you have a good amount of poets that do not perform. They do not perform. All they do is write. That's all they do. Where my whole thing is someone who, and I would even say it in this context, someone who writes well, but also is able to perform well, I think they become a spoken word artist. It's a combination of, being the poet and being the rapper and, bringing them together in being the spoken word artist as a whole. So, yeah. All of the division is just based on perception, based on, status, class, all the bullshit that inevitably separates us as human beings. So, with that said, I'm Frank, and this is next episode, Ponder Report series. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, y'all take it easy.